Chapter 1. Tangerine Days. The Tangerine sun beamed down over the rolling brown hills. The heat had already consumed any traces of the morning dew. An empty pond was full of small footprints imprinted in the dry mud, undoubtedly from children who once played there. Dust hung heavy in the air as groups of people trudged over the cracked ground. Their tired and dark eyes stayed forward. They didn't dare steal any glances at the soldiers around them. Soldiers who carried wicked-looking guns. Soldiers who were relatively well-fed and could afford to burn energy being cruel. Soldiers like me. But I wasn't cruel. Was I? I thought.
Keep moving!
I shouted as kindly as a person could shout. There was no reason to say anything at all. Everyone was moving and showed no intention of stopping. I just felt like I needed to say something.
The trucks will take you somewhere safe.
I finished. I don't think I convinced them. I was just another person with a gun giving orders. The war was moving closer and closer to this town, and we were here to evacuate the townspeople so that they didn't get caught up in the fighting. I wasn't even sure that they were our people. They could have belonged to either country, Satru or Lud. This was a border town, so the correct answer was probably that the people here belonged to both. The reward they were getting for their cooperation was that they were more likely to be casualties. We called the town Dangton, but maybe the people of Satru had a different name for it on their maps. This was one of the last remaining towns along the border of Satru and Lud. All the rest had been abandoned or leveled. I was sad that the people here weren't being held up as an example of two different peoples learning to live together, but I was grateful that we, the Lud military, were taking the time to evacuate them. A few artillery shells had already landed uncomfortably close by. No one was hurt, but the shockwave shattered the windows of nearly every building in the town center. The shattered glass of the store windows littered the walkways and spilled into the primitive roads of this sleepy town. The jewels of a man's endeavors glittered in the sunlight and sent queer shapes bouncing along the soon-to-be abandoned storefront. The little shops where the little people made their living were hollow. The people always suffer whenever countries squabble. But of course, Satru had attacked us first. Satruvian soldiers had crossed over our border and taken over a village, killing several citizens when they dared to protest. That's what all of the flyers and leaflets on our side said anyways. I imagine the papers just over the rugged, hilly landscape to the north said something entirely different. The day was getting hotter. The Orange Emperor was at his peak and ruling tyrannically over the land. I wiped my forehead with my shirt sleeve. I'm not built for this sort of weather. Someone bumped me hard from behind.
Rosid!
A voice shouted. Startled, I turned around. It was Alvin, a man from my unit. Alvin and I had gone through training together. He was the only other person at the training camp smaller than I was, but he made up for it with tenacity. His slight frame and fiery attitude had made him the target of would-be bullies. I would often find him nursing a bruise on his small, mousy face alongside a wolfish grin. He loved to fight. It was quite the sight to see his brown shock of hair weaving side to side, dodging punch after punch. He floated like oil through water, and it always took at least 2 men to keep him on the ground.
The last of the townspeople are getting on the trucks. Let's knock off and grab some grub.
He urged, wearing his trademark grin. He was always trying to avoid work any way he could.
We haven't been dismissed yet,
I asserted.
They'll be making the announcement any time now. Come on, Rosie. Don't you want to be first in line?
He coaxed. I hated that nickname. Rosie was no nickname for a soldier. Why couldn't he call me something like sharpshooter or striker? But I was tired of the heat too and needed a break. I gave him my best disapproving glare, but I relented and followed him down. We made our way to the abandoned school where the soldiers stationed at the town spent their nights and took their meals. We cut through the equally vacant playground, which, at some point in its life, must have evoked laughter from the pups of the town, but had now been left to rust and flake in the elements. Whenever the wind blew, which it rarely did, the skeletons of the forgotten playthings would creak and sway to the eerie music, dancing in lament at their abandonment. I was thankful for the relief the wind gave from the heat, but the sounds made me uncomfortable and a little sad. We ducked under a gap in a partially collapsed wall of the school building. The electricity supplying the building had long ago been cut off, but thick beams of sunlight shone through missing segments of the roof and illuminated the dingy rooms. The wooden floors were covered in dust, and the desks and tables had all been pushed to the sides and piled together to make room for the soldiers. This was no longer a place for school books and children. We weren't the only ones ready to eat. Others had already started to gather around a crate where they were passing out the rations. Alvin and I fell into line and each gratefully accepted a little brown cardboard box. Everyone was settling in among the emptied-out school building with the people they were familiar with and started eating. We found a pile of overturned desks to nestle ourselves up against and greedily unwrapped our packages of rations. I tore at the paper and let the tin cans spill into my lap. I located the biggest can and turned the key on the top to open it. I gave myself permission to smile a bit. The food was never great, but at least I got my favorite today: spaghetti noodles and meatballs with the military's best attempt at a tomato sauce. It had been a while since I'd had any luck with the rations they randomly doled out day in and day out. I gave the contents a satisfied stir with my fork.
What have you got?
Alvin asked, craning his neck to nosily check the contents of my can of rations. I pulled my fork out and dangled the noodles.
Spaghetti,
I said while stuffing them into my mouth. Alvin would want to trade, so my only hope of putting him off was to eat half of it before he even asked. He grimaced and looked down at his own can of food.
Mystery meat and beans for me again.
He sighed. Alvin hesitated and then jammed the full spoon into his mouth, forcing himself to take a bite. After all, food was energy, and none of us could afford to be picky. A few minutes of choking down a gelatinous mixture of chewy meat and beans were better than hours of gnawing hunger. I was eager to return to Fort Romkin, our base of operations.
do you figure we'll have to spend another night here?
I asked, already working on opening my next can of rations. I was hoping this one would have the crackers since those always come with chocolate, but my luck didn't hold out. A small stack of crumbly biscuits was all I was greeted with once I pulled off the lid.
I doubt it.
Alvin sputtered through a mouthful of food.
The last of the townspeople were carted off to safety today.
Safety, I thought. That word had lost a lot of its meaning of late. The people of the town wouldn't be caught up in the war today or even next week, but it would catch up to them eventually. No one can outrun war. They didn't have to die in a spray of bullets. Some of them had already had their homes leveled by artillery fire and small bombing runs. After a few more days, this charming little town would transform into nothing more than cratered earth. Having nowhere or no one to return to could be just as bad as dying.
Rosid! Rosid! Rosid!
Alvin shouted, snapping his fingers in front of my face. I gently shoved his hand away from my face.
What?
I grumbled.
You really zoned out there.
He murmured.
I was asking you if you knew where the townspeople are being evacuated to.
He said.
I don't know where they end up.
I answered.
Just that they'll be logged, processed, and moved someplace where they won't have to worry about a bomb falling on their heads.
I suppose someone in my position didn't need to know where the innocent bystanders would be taken. But if I did, it might help me sleep easier. Before Alvin could say anything else, a couple of mismatched soldiers ambled up to us.
Not finished yet?
The taller of the pair asked.
You two eat even slower when there is work needing to be done.
The shorter, more muscled man chastised. Neither of the men waited for an answer before slumping down alongside us, completing our social circle. Both of these men were from my unit as well. The man who had spoken first was Ferguson. He was tall, lanky, and never said much. A practical man, he kept his head shaved himself rather than fuss with Fort Romkin's barber every month. He was a bit older than I was at 27, and he had recently received a letter saying that his wife had given him his first son. Even after several rounds of celebratory drinks, we still couldn't get him to say much. It was no surprise that the other man, Barrett, gave us a finger wagging for slacking off on our work. Barrett was a heavily muscled, stern man. He did his duties diligently, but never took any personal pride in them. Barrett was very much one of those people who joined because he felt he had to. Being so obviously able-bodied, he wouldn't risk the shame of not enlisting when other men, both younger and older than he was, were being sent off to war. I often joked that he was the opposite of Alvin, much to his chagrin. Even though Satru attacked us first, killing several looked citizens, not everyone agreed with a full-scale war. I never asked Barrett or Ferguson about whether or not they supported the war. It didn't feel right. I didn't know everything about the two men, but I knew enough. Both Ferguson and Barrett could be relied upon. Based on my looks, nobody would ever guess that I was the squad leader. I may not be able to lift a truck like Barrett or reach the top shelf like Ferguson, but I am a quick study. I'm the best shot in the group, and I have the right head for tactics and strategy. At least, that is the conclusion the top brass overseeing the training camp had come to. Apparently, I performed well enough on their battery of mental and physical tests to be assigned to a leadership position. I remember the group of old men watching as I crawled through mud under razor wire, participated in mock battles, and took written exams that supposedly measured intelligence. I still remember their dull eyes watching us. I felt less like a person and more like a game piece to be positioned on a board. I never settled comfortably into my role as a squad leader, but I did what was expected of me by the military. It's an easy choice when the alternative is being taken out to the yard and shot in front of everyone. I tossed a hardtack biscuit into both Ferguson and Barrett's laps.
There.
I huffed.
Now that you're not finished with your lunch, you can join us and stop complaining.
I was happy to be rid of a few of the biscuits. They took ages to chew and swallow, but throwing away food is frowned upon when others don't always have enough to go around. Both of the men silently accepted the food and went to work on eating them. Alvin gave Ferguson a playful punch on the shoulder.
Put some meat on those bones.
He teased.
You're one to talk.
I scolded Alvin.
Maybe this will help you grow a bit.
I lobbed the tin can from the rations that would contain something resembling a dessert toward him. Alvin ignored my insult and happily accepted.
Thanks!
He exclaimed, wrenching the top off of the can and digging into what turned out to be dry pound cake. It didn't matter to Alvin that the pound cake was a sad imitation of a freshly baked one. The taste of sugar is so rare nowadays that the dessert cans are of the highest value to the men. I'm supposed to treat my squad as subordinates and show them an appropriate and equal amount of care. But I had a soft spot for Alvin. It wasn't just because we went through training together. He was basically a big kid, and the war, thus far, hadn't changed that. He was here because he had been drafted, not because of some strong conviction. Once the war ended, he might be one of the only one of us to settle back into his old life like nothing had happened. After spending so much time with him, I had come to see him as a younger brother. With nothing left to eat and no reason to sit around, I stood up and stretched my stiff back and limbs.
I'll head back outside. This empty school building gives me the creeps.
I admitted.
If they make the announcement that we're heading back to Fort Rompkin, you all know where to go.
They nodded and went back to talking amongst themselves. No one was watching, so there was no reason for them to salute me. I didn't mind. In fact, I was glad they didn't. I honestly give the three of them a little too much independence. But if I trusted them with my life, I could trust them to get in the back of a truck without me there to babysit them. I headed back out of the dilapidated school building the same way Alvin and I had come in. The sun had fallen a bit, but not nearly enough to make any noticeable difference in the heat. I wouldn't see any relief from the temperature until the sun was inching down below the horizon. In a few hours, the blazing emperor's pale bride would temporarily depose him and usurp command of the sky. She was arguably a kinder ruler than her mate. But even she and her court of shining knights couldn't permanently hold him from his lofty throne of air. I shivered in spite of the heat. I did not want to spend the night in the recently emptied town. I didn't trust man-made structures standing alone without the men who made them. It made me feel like a trespasser, that my presence in the place was somehow wrong. With my gun flung over my shoulder, I wandered down one of the stone pathways of the town. Alvin was right. With everyone gone, there wasn't much left to do. I would look busy by appearing to be on patrol, but really, I was just trying to fight off the boredom. Being a soldier involved more downtime than I was expecting. I used my forearm to wipe the dust away from the window of a house to take a peek inside. It was mostly empty, except for anything that would have been too large to carry for the former occupants. Despite that, I had no problem imagining it as a home. Herbs drying on the windowsill, the floorboards creaking with each step of a loved one. A modest dinner served at the crude wooden table. It was a pleasant image, and one that I wanted to be a part of. I wouldn't mind living in a town like this after the fighting ends. Maybe I could own a flower shop or a bakery, chat with the neighbors, and live in peace. I could think of worse things than coming home each day to a quaint little house of wood and stone. Yeah, right. Imagine me, baking bread, I thought. My daydream was cut short by several thumping sounds, followed by a loud crash. It came from around the corner down an alley between the houses. I readied my gun and pressed my back against the wall of the house, closest to the opening of the alleyway. I could hear the sound of someone walking and rummaging around. I peeked around the corner. 2 soldiers had let themselves into one of the recently abandoned houses. I didn't know them, but we shared the same style of lewd uniform and were, therefore, on the same side. The splintered remains of a simple wooden door lay in the alleyway. One of the soldiers was carrying a small box out of the house. The other was gripping the ruined doorframe and leaning into the house. The noise I had heard must have been them kicking in the door to burglarize the place. Since I confirmed that they were ours and not enemy scouts, I let go of my weapon and stepped around the corner to reveal myself.
Hey,
I shouted.
what do you think you're doing?
The 2 men jumped with surprise, but relaxed when they realized we were part of the same company. The soldier leaning into the house had a long, sad-looking face. The one carrying the box had sharp eyes and a pointed nose.
Calm down. We were just checking to make sure everyone had left safely.
Lied the long-faced soldier. I nodded my head toward the other soldier.
Then what has he got there?
I questioned.
The people who lived here aren't coming back.
The sharp-eyed man hissed.
It'll just go to waste if we don't take it.
They'll come back when it's safe. We're soldiers, not burglars.
I said firmly. I eyed their shoulders and took note of the insignia denoting their rank. I outranked these 2.
Return anything you took and go back to your posts. That's an order,
I commanded. The 2 offending soldiers paused and exchanged glances. They didn't budge.
The way I see it,
Began the sharp-eyed soldier.
is that there are 2 of us and 1 of you.
Why don't you pretend you didn't see us and we won't have to beat you to a pulp and stash you in one of these abandoned houses?
The long-faced man threatened. His face was less sad and more angry now. He took a step toward me. I took a step forward of my own.
Stand down and return to your posts,
I repeated. The long-faced man lunged forward and threw a punch at my face. He overextended. I stepped to the side to dodge the punch. In one fluid motion, I grabbed and pulled his forearm while simultaneously extending my foot to trip him. He hit the ground hard, but I wasn't finished. I gave him a swift kick to the stomach to ensure that he didn't get up immediately. The sharp-eyed man assessed the situation and decided he was better off running. He turned and sprinted away from me, but didn't drop the box. I picked up a fist-sized rock from the ground and threw it high in an arc at the fleeing man. It hit him in the shoulder and he tumbled roughly to the ground. I crinkled my nose in disappointment. Darn. I was aiming for his head, I thought. I made my way over to where the man had fallen to the ground. A low groan escaped his lips. The contents of the pilfered box had spilled onto the pathway. A few meager silver rings and a yellowed stack of family photos were all that it contained. I scooped up the contents and placed them back inside the box before picking it up.
I'll take that.
I said. I tapped the man hard with the toe of my boot.
You and your friend make your way back to your posts or wherever you're supposed to be,
I ordered.
I'll be taking this back to where you found it.
I walked over and slowly entered the ransacked house. Even though I was helping this unknowing family out, it still felt wrong to enter the house without permission. I placed the box on the table and stroked the smooth lid. The box wasn't professionally made, but I could tell someone had spent a lot of time sanding the wood and piecing it together. It was probably made by an older child or a well-meaning cousin as a small gift. I opened the box and took out the stack of photos. I flipped through them, one after the other. They depicted a typical happy family, a mom, a dad, a little boy, and a little girl. Where were they now? Were they safe? I thought. I sighed and shut the lid. I thought of my own family. I tried to conjure up the image of my mother and my father, but their faces were blurry. They were kind and loving. But as the years passed, the details of their appearance faded bit by bit. I thought of my older brother, David. His image in my mind was crystal clear. David had taken care of me after my parents died in a car accident when we were both young. When the war started, he had to don the uniform of a soldier, too. He had often written to me while he was away before he went missing. I sighed.
I'll find you,
I promised. I headed back to the main square where I found that the other soldiers were gradually streaming through the streets. I fell in and blended back into the dark green mass of uniforms.
They give the order?
I asked the person next to me. He nodded. Alvin was right. We wouldn't have to spend another night in the town. We were clearing out and heading back to our base. For that, I was thankful. We were trespassers here. I stayed within the river of bodies until I reached the convoy of trucks. The group divided into lines and filed into the vehicles in an orderly manner. We were seated shoulder to shoulder with one another. No one spoke. I was once again just another faceless member of the military. With a grinding sound and a rumble, the truck came to life and jerked forward. I was headed back to Fort Romkin.